The Nintendo 64's roster of games contains classics that are often considered the greatest of all time. From Super Mario 64 to Ocarina of Time, and of course Banjo-Kazooie, the console revolutionized gaming. Many of us will look back quite fondly on that time, recalling all of the amazing adventures we went on. But there is one game that I never hear anybody talk about, that being Donkey Kong 64. The Donkey Kong Country series is likely what most people think of when it comes to the character. That's understandable, of course, the title was extremely popular, but I am still surprised I don't hear more about his one and only 3D adventure, especially considering that's built from the same foundation as Banjo-Kazooie. The game opens with its iconic DK rap. This song is really goofy, but that also sets the tone right away for the adventure. It's going to be filled with all sorts of silly things happening, and that lets us know we are here to have a good time. The rap also showcases the characters and gives us a glimpse at their different playstyles, giving us an idea of the kind of gameplay in store for the player. It's really effective at what it wants to do, and a great way to introduce players to the game. Moving into the introduction, we see that the other characters have been kidnapped along with Donkey Kong's golden banana stash being raided. Thus starts the Collectathon. Collecting golden bananas, regular bananas, and banana medals will unlock new areas and abilities along with aiding and rescuing the other Kongs. As the Kongs are rescued, the game does a great job at differentiating between them. They are all unique with their own personalities along with strengths and weaknesses. Lanky is quite derpy, often using all sorts of abilities that stretch his body while making goofy sounds. Tiny comes across as quite cool and carefree while having the ability to, well, become tiny. It's not as flashy as some of the other abilities, but it gives the player a very different perspective of the world. Everything changes when you shrink that much. My favorite is Chunky. He's slower but physically stronger than the other members of the team, and it shows in his ability to punch doors open or carry huge boulders. What I like most about him though is his personality. He comes across like he is genuinely having fun when doing things like his spin attack. Even when picking him in the character selection screen, he acts quite goofy. All the characters are chosen through a character barrel that the player jumps into. When inside, all of the Kongs encourage you to pick them. They wave their hands and try to get the focus on them. When highlighted, they often look very confident and act like it's obviously the right choice to pick them. When scrolled past, they get super disappointed, with Donkey Kong even putting his face in his hands. Chunky, on the other hand, somewhat taunts the player. He makes noises and antagonizes the player a little bit, that is until you highlight him. He didn't think he'd actually get chosen, and panics. Chunky desperately tries to get you to scroll away from him and gives a sigh of relief when you do. It's just a character selection screen, but there is still so much life to it. Even though the characters don't really speak audibly, they do through text bubbles, they are filled with so much personality and character. It's really well done. Even the side characters ooze personality. Cranky Kong provides abilities and upgrades for the team, but is usually sassing them at every opportunity he gets. Funky Kong has a literal armory, providing the Kongs with weapons, but will mimic shooting guns and explosions while talking to him. I don't see how anybody couldn't find this game so damn charming. Charming is the best way I'd describe this game. No surprise considering it was made by the same studio behind Banjo-Kazooie. Unfortunately, for as much charm as it hasn't aged well in many aspects. The Nintendo 64 revolutionized gaming into 3D, but nowadays some limitations behind the games in the system can be quite frustrating. I am of course referring to the controls. Within seconds of hopping into the game, its clunky controls become extremely apparent. The game uses what can be referred to as snap movement. Essentially, the analog stick does not actually control a 360-degree circle of movement, but instead snaps into 8 directions of movement. It can be clearly seen how characters will snap to the side when turning even slightly. This can not only be frustrating, but create immense difficulty in controlling characters, especially in situations like when on a beam, where it's required to move in a straight line. It's easy in those moments to snap directions when it wasn't intended and fall, forcing the player to restart what they were doing. Don't even get me started on underwater controls. Problems are intensified when the wonky camera comes into play. It often just doesn't know how to act when up against walls or in tight areas. Sometimes it just won't look where you want it to, and all sorts of other annoyances. Looking back on the system, it pushed the technology forward, but damn was the camera awful in a lot of games like this. Quick side note, I ran into a weird problem where my game was darker than it should have been. I think this is because modern day TVs aren't built to run older systems like the 64. Like, there was this one spot where I was trying to do a quote-unquote stealth mission, but I legit couldn't see anything. On the footage I captured, you can see me running into walls constantly because it was so dark. Super strange, just something I wanted to mention. These kinds of issues are more technological in nature though. This stuff wouldn't have to be present if updated to the modern day. Remaking the game and updating the controls and camera to modern levels would instantly create a smoother game to play. In doing so would allow a lot of that charm to really shine, and also allow us to appreciate the contents of the game that much more, like the levels. Each area is quite distinct, not just in visuals but also design. The first area, Jungle Japes, puts you directly into the heart of the island. It has you scaling the mountainside and exploring cave systems, giving you a little bit of everything. By doing so, it eases the player into gameplay elements as well, allowing them to interact and learn what they will need to master later, making a solid first level. Gloomy Galleon is a water-based level, and while I cannot stand water-based levels in games, the area still stands out to me. It's a cove featuring a lighthouse and its own pirate ship. It's even got sunken ships in the bay that are apparently, from what I read, meant to be a part of a previous DK title, which is neat. You control the water level, which will allow for different activities. I really like that each character gets to explore a part of a sunken ship for a golden banana. Even if I don't like the swimming, the area is still quite memorable. My favorite area is Angry Aztec, the desert theme level. Its quicksand provides a source of danger all over the place, which for me makes the area feel like it's an actual dangerous place to be, even excluding the enemies. At the same time, the quicksand isn't an instant kill or anything like that, just a little bit of damage which keeps it from being overwhelming. Visually, it isn't anything too spectacular, as it's just sand everywhere, but I find exploring the temples and cave systems to make up for it by providing me a better sense of exploration. Something I really enjoy about the areas is how they continuously open up through the game. As new characters and abilities are unlocked, there are often things to go back and do. Some may say that it could be annoying to backtrack all the time, and I see where people would be coming from. However, the backtracking isn't a requirement per se. There are tons of things to do, but you don't have to do all of them. Like when unlocking a new area, you will need to collect a certain number of golden bananas to access the level, but it doesn't matter where those bananas come from. There are 200 bananas to collect through the game, with the largest requirement on a world being 100. That means you only need to collect half the bananas to progress, which means there would never be a time you have to backtrack. Instead, the player is consistently given options on what they want to do. If a spot is too difficult or you just don't really care for a level, well, you don't need to do everything in that level. There is plenty to accomplish throughout the rest of the game to make up for it. I really like keeping older areas relevant. Going back to Jungle Japes when unlocking the final character makes the world feel more real, as of course there would be things to do for everybody. Oh, and that's another thing I love about the level design, they really make use of everybody. They don't waste a single character, and provide plenty of unique challenges to make use of each character's skill set. I am gushing a bit. I really do think the levels of this game are fantastic, but I admit, it isn't all perfect. The biggest flaw of the game, in my opinion, is the bonus missions. Sometimes golden bananas are behind weird minigames. Not all of these are bad, like the stealth one I mentioned earlier. Excluding the issues with my TV, there wasn't anything wrong with the mission itself. On the other hand, we have just awful missions, like the racing ones. For example, there's a racing mission where you play as Tiny and the goal is to not only beat the opponent to the finish line, but you also have to collect a bunch of DK coins along the way. It's a complete mess of a mission. The two objectives are not very compatible with each other, especially when we take the wonky controls into account. It's made worse by the fact that you lose coins if you hit the opponent. The mission should focus on one or the other, not both at the same time, because it just ends up being frustrating. Unbelievably so when the guy makes these sounds that would be used in Guantanamo Bay. Or how about this minigame, where the player is on a minecart and has to avoid an explosive by moving rails. I got quite frustrated on this one because the controls just wouldn't work properly for me. I think what makes these things frustrating is that I know the issues are technical and could be fixed. Personally, I'd like a lot of these missions turned into something else to do with the worlds themselves, but even minorly tweaking a lot of them to be less frustrating would be amazing to see. Even with that frustration, I'm glad I went back and played through the game again. I had forgotten just how charming the game was. I love to see how small things really push characters' personalities to the forefront. It was cool to see and appreciate things I didn't get to as a kid. The soundtrack only enhanced the fun and goofy nature of the game. It has so much going for it that I think it needs to be talked about more. It's a shame that this is DK's only 3D adventure, but maybe that could change. With some technical improvements and minor changes here and there, so many could experience this game that didn't get to back when it was first released. Remaking a game has the potential to expose a game to a whole new audience and revitalize the franchise it belongs to, and this is one such title. Donkey Kong 64 absolutely deserves a remake.